Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So in the last class, we were discussing this Fourier transform method. Was there anything not clear last time, or I can progress?
Sir,
So,
what does
yes.
the violet, I don't know, violet coloring indicate, sir? Like x-axis
Oh,
is f of
it's only
and
saying
y-axis.
that what is the extent of the Fourier transform of these functions.
Okay.
Okay, in Fourier space, where do they sit? Okay, they may have different magnitudes phase in this region, but this is a region where these functions are essentially sitting. Okay.
Okay.
And so we have to discuss before going further. We have to discuss a few sampling criteria so that we understand how or whether your hologram has been sampled correctly on the camera. Okay, it's camera sensor. So I'm going to discuss a few things here. So first of all, we will assume that our object wave has an effective spatial frequency bandwidth of 2b by 2b, okay, in frequency space. And so first thing I want you to kind of convince yourself that if you take two plane waves and the angle between the two plane waves is theta, then the fringe frequency is given by sine theta by lambda. Can you work this out? So suppose I take two plane waves. One is going along, say the z direction, and the other is going along an angle. So the k vector is making angle theta in the xz plane, for example. Okay. So if you try to write these two plane waves, you will have so in the z equal to 0 plane, for example, the plane wave that is going along z axis is going to be just 1. And the second plane wave may be written as e raised to I kx sine theta. Okay. And so if you calculate the interference pattern of 1 and e raised to I kx sine theta, then you will see that the period of fringes or the frequency of fringes is going to be sine theta by lambda. So the period of fringes is going to be lambda divided by sine theta. Have you all evaluated this sometime? At least during the.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
the frequency is going to be sine theta by lambda. So this is the frequency that we are interested in when we think about Nyquist rate and things like that. Well, we are interested in slightly higher frequency than that, because if you look at this picture, the total extent along x-axis of this Fourier transform is actually 2 times f naught plus 2 times b. Okay. And so our Nyquist rate will have to conform to this rate somehow. And so there is an interesting thing here that we need to make sure that suppose my object wave has a frequency bandwidth of 2b by 2b, then what I don't want is that the object wave lobe that is here, last time somebody already told as an answer that the information of interest is sitting in this lobe or this lobe, okay, but not in the central lobe, because we are interested in getting this complex object wave. Now we don't want these the central lobe and the side lobe to actually overlap with each other. Okay, so if we know that our object wave has a bandwidth of say 2b by 2b, then what we need is that this f0, the fringe frequency that we choose, must be larger than this 2b plus b, which is 3b. Okay, so we need 3b to be less than equal to f0, and so that means that the angle between the off-axis plane wave and the nominal object beam, that angle has to be more than arc sine of 3b by lambda, because it's f0 is actually sine theta by lambda, and so as a result we can actually say that theta has to be more than arc sine of 3b by lambda. Okay. Did I do a mistake here? Let me check.
Yes, sir.
3b lambda. Sorry, yeah, it can't be divided by. B times lambda cannot have any units, so it is 3b lambda. Okay, so I think this slash came by mistake. Second thing is we also want that there is adequate sampling of fringes on a pixelated detector. Now, if you let's think that the nominal fringe period is 1 divided by f0. Okay, and so what we want is that, see, you have heard from Nyquist rate that if you are sampling a sinusoidal wave, the sampling theorem and things like that, that if you are sampling a sinusoid, then you need at least 2 samples per cycle. And so you might say that I want my fringe period to be at least 2 pixels or more. But if you look at it, the camera pixels are not really delta samples, so it's not just a sample at a point, because the pixel actually has a finite size, and so on a pixel what you get is an integrated intensity over its own length. And as a result, if you just have the fringe, one fringe on 2 pixels, that will be a very poor representation of the fringe pattern on the camera. And as a result, you need maybe about 4 pixels, so that one fringe period is about 4 pixels. Okay. Otherwise, the fringe function, if you try to plot the sinusoid by going across the fringes, it will not look very good sinusoid otherwise. So at least 4 pixels, I would say, as a thumb rule, is required meaning ideally the Nyquist rate requires 2 samples per fringe, but typically you will require, to represent the fringes well, you will probably require a little bit larger, or meaning you will need to have more pixels within a fringe. 2 pixels within a fringe is too less. If it was really ideal delta samples, then it is fine. But since the samples are not delta samples, this would be required. And so if you look at it, what you need is that 1 by 4p is more than f0, and f0 has to be more than 3b. So there are now 2 conditions. One condition is purely based on this diagram, that you don't want these lobes to overlap. And the second condition is that your fringes need to be adequately sampled on the pixelated detector, and this gives you these 2 conditions. And so if you look at it, what is a typical pixel size on cameras today? It is about 2 micron to 5 micron. Okay, and let's say lambda is 0.5 micron in the visible. And so if you try to calculate this angle theta, you will see that angle theta is actually, in digital holography, if you try to record, this angle is actually quite small. Yes. Hello. Yeah. So can you quickly estimate what this angle theta is? If P is actually so we have kind of limit from the side that from the Fourier space picture, we have a limit that the angle has to be larger than certain, the angle of arc sine 3b lambda. But the angle cannot be too large, because if the angle is too large, then the fringes will be too dense and they cannot be sampled on the camera. And so the typical angle that will be allowed in this case is going to be small. Typically for it will be just about 1 to 2 degrees. And so otherwise the fringe density will be too much for the sensor pixels. And so so what is happening is the Nyquist frequency for fringes is decided by this whole interval. OK. And so in one shot, when you record this hologram, the available bandwidth for your object wave is actually much smaller than this whole bandwidth. So if you are thinking about sampling the fringes at Nyquist rate, you have to worry about this whole interval. But so even if your camera has a small enough pixel size that it covers this whole frequency interval, when you think about sampling, this whole interval as per this picture is not allowable for your object beam. So your object beam bandwidth is much smaller than what is allowable based on the Nyquist rate. OK. All these points, are they clear? Or any of these points requires more discussion?
So can you repeat the last section?
Yeah, so the last point is, look at this, look at it this way. So we have now two limits, isn't it? First limit is that because of this Fourier space picture, my theta, which is the angle between the object beam and the reference beam, which decides the spatial frequency, that theta has to be large enough, so that these different lobes do not overlap. OK, because if they overlap, what is the problem if these lobes overlap? What happens?
They get minimized. I mean, like distorted in the region they overlap, something like that.
So now, meaning it's only one in one frame hologram or one shot hologram, you have only one recording of HXY. And so if these two overlap, then at least nominally, there seems to be no way to recover that information that is overlapping, isn't it? Because in the region of overlap, what will happen is the Fourier transform will be a sum of two Fourier transforms, the values from this lobe and values from that lobe. And there is no way immediately that in one shot hologram, you can probably recover those mixed pixels. OK. So the second point is, so you need the angle to be larger than this arc sine of 3b lambda. OK. But can I increase the angle as much as I want? I cannot actually increase the angle as much as I want, because if I increase the angle, then what that means is the fringe frequency is higher, or what it means is the fringe period is going to be quite small. And if the fringe period is very small, then I cannot really sample it correctly on the camera pixels. Because if the fringe period is very small, then one pixel may have several fringes, and then there is no way to represent the hologram function correctly. So what you can do is, you can try to take this pixel size equal to say 2 micron, which is typical pixel size in many cameras today. So typical pixel size today is about 2 to 5 microns. Only some cell phone cameras today go down to about 1.5 microns. OK, but nominally you will get 2 micron cameras. So you can say that my f0 has to be less than 1 divided by 4p. OK. But then so there are two bounds on how much the angle can be. So the angle has to be at least large enough that it does not cause overlap of the bands, and it has to be small enough that it is, the fringes are sampled well. Okay, is that clear? So if you actually calculate this, so if you take lambda as 0.5 and p as say 2 microns, the allowable angle, meaning from the first condition, say 81, the condition is theta is greater than equal to something. Okay, but in the other condition, theta is going to be smaller than something else. Okay, and as a result, the largest allowable angle typically in a digital holography experiment will be something like 1 to 2 degrees, not more than that, depending on the pixel size. So you can try to calculate this if you want.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, this upper bound of 1/4p, is it a thumb rule or has it been derived from some criteria?
It is a thumb rule, but it is derived based on Nyquist rate, first of all, which means I need 2 samples per fringe, isn't it? First of all. But since my samples are not delta samples, they are actually averaging over some pixel length. Exactly operating at Nyquist rate is not sufficient. So at least double the, you need to allow more pixels within one cycle of the fringe oscillation. So if you try to see, fringes recorded on camera, then you will see them as fringes only if you have 4 pixels for a fringe. Otherwise, the function may not look like even sinusoidal fringes. There will be a lot of artifacts on how the fringes look in the first place. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so it is dependent on Nyquist rate, but as you see that you cannot operate exactly at Nyquist rate, you have to leave some margin because pixels are not giving you point samples, but area samples. Okay.
Sir, does this also have to do with the dead bands between the pixels?
Dead bands in between pixels are not so large. Typically, they are just about 5% in length compared to pixel size. Okay. So dead bands is still does not give you a point sample, meaning, so if you have a pixel pitch of say 5 microns, then only 0.25 maybe the dead, 0.25 micron maybe the dead area between 2 pixels. So I think that is going to be there just from a manufacturing standpoint or fabrication standpoint, but meaning that does not help you in terms of getting finer samples really. And you want to keep the pixel area as much as possible so that it collects more and more light, within the pixel area. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Because if you look at, yes.
So what is the meaning of dead band?
Dead band means that there is an area between 2 pixels where there won't be any, meaning that's not a light sensitive area. So if you think about pixels on a sensor, 1000 by 1000, then compared to pixel pitch between 2 pixels, there will be some region at the boundary where the area will not be light sensitive. Okay, that is what it means.
Okay, sir.
So can we move ahead? Okay, so let's go ahead.
Yes, sir.
So typically in the lab, if you want to, so by the way, let me tell you something that traditionally when people recorded holograms on films, the film resolution is actually quite large, meaning quite high compared to digital cameras. So because the resolution on a film depends on, the photographic film specifically made for holography, they used to be, meaning there was a lot of chemistry involved in it. And so it depends on, the silver grain size. And so there you can, in traditionally in display holography on film, you can work with much larger angles, meaning people easily work with angle theta of the order of 30 to 40 degrees. But with the digital holography, you cannot actually increase that angle because the fringe density will become too much for the sampling purpose. Okay. So typically, what is the kind of arrangement you have in the lab that allows you to do digital holography? So I'm showing a couple of examples. One is a reflection geometry, and it is essentially a Michelson interferometer. And second is a transmission geometry, and it is more like a well, both are. It's not really Michelson per se, but if you start thinking from this side, it is like Michelson. But so let's see how it works. So here you have a laser beam that is collimated. So there is a pinhole and then a lens. And so you split this into two beams. And the first beam goes in and it goes to illuminate this sample. And some light is reflected back from the sample, which is collected and forms the object wave. Whereas the second beam, which is the reference beam, that goes through this beam splitter, and then it is again brought back to the camera from this port of the beam splitter. Okay, so this kind of geometry will allow you to do reflective holography, where there is a reflection. But the reason why this type of arrangement is preferable is because you can make the angles in this arrangement quite small. So the angle between the reference and object beam that I showed you just needs to be about 1 to 2 degrees. And so that can be adjusted by just tweaking the mirror positions slightly. Another way is, even to just rotate this beam splitter itself slightly, so that allows you to get a small angle between the reference beam and the object beam. The second configuration could be more like a transmission geometry. So I think this is not really Michelson. I would say this is also a Mach-Zehnder somehow. And this one is a Mach-Zehnder geometry where, the object beam is actually getting transmitted through the sample. And so that is imaged on the camera. And on the other side, again, you see that this is the reference beam is again imaged on the camera, meaning sent to the camera. But they are both derived from the same laser beam. And as a result, they actually form an interference pattern. Okay, so here in the drawing, it may appear that the angle between R and O beams is actually 0. Okay, but that is tweaked by rotating, slightly tweaking this beam through this mirror, or slightly tuning the angle of this beam splitter. But when people draw it, it might just seem like the angle is 0, but the angle is not 0. It is but it's small. Okay. Do you understand these diagrams? You have all seen some form of interferometer before, right? So I think these diagrams should be clear. Or is something not clear? Then you ask me. Is this clear, these diagrams?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now let us ask this question, that if you look at the Michelson, the reflection geometry versus transmission geometry, what is the difference? Meaning there is, when you record the interference pattern, there is going to be some phase modulation on the fringes, which means the fringes are going to be bending. If instead of sample, I just put a mirror there, then I will have two waves that are interfering at an angle. And so I'll just get plain, straight line fringes. But now I will not get straight line fringes because of the sample. And so what is the meaning of phase in these two configurations? Can somebody tell me what is the meaning of phase here? phase of the fringes, or phase modulation of fringes. So in the reflection geometry, what does the phase modulation mean? And so phase, when I'm talking about the phase of the object beam. Okay, so phi of O. So what does this phase mean for reflection geometry and for transmission geometry? What do you think?
Sir, usually reflection refers to 180-degree shift. I don't know, maybe that. By angle.
Well, but what you are going to get is a spatially varying phase modulation, isn't it? If I try to image this plane here onto the camera, then at every location there is a different phase, isn't it, for the object wave?
So does that mean inverted or something like that?
Yeah, so with the reflection geometry, what you are getting is more like the profile of this surface, okay? Whereas in transmission geometry, what you are getting is the phase actually means the optical path difference through the object or the sample at different locations. So if you think about it, this is the light is coming down and it is getting reflected, and so at different locations the height profile is different, and as a result the beam is getting XY dependent phase on itself. Okay, and so the fringes for different phase values at different XY locations, locally the fringes at those places will bend differently. Okay. Similarly, here what is happening is you are sending light through a essentially transparent sample, and as a result, at every location in this sample, you are collecting different phase. The optical path difference at different locations XY through the sample is going to be different. The optical path difference is, by the way, it is the 2 pi by lambda times refractive index times the physical length. Okay, so if I'm at this location, there is some height x, some height, say h1, but if I'm at other location, I have a different height h2. And so depending on the height of the sample at those different locations, and also the local refractive index variation, I'm going to have different phase values for the wavefront that emerges out of this object. And so at different locations, yes.
Sir, in transmission geometry, the wavefront which emerges from the sample is susceptible to internal structure, right?
Yes, it is actually seeing the internal structure. Yes.
Okay.
But it is like a projection through. I will write one more equation on the next slide, but basically it is an integrated phase through the sample. Okay. Well, here I'm also assuming that a sample is thin enough. All right. We will consider more complicated cases at some point, maybe, where the sample is thick. But here, at least sample can be. So this this whole picture can be assumed to be like a single blood cell, for example, which is a donut-shaped object, and so there is a little dip in the center. Okay. And the blood cell is just about 8 to 10 microns in length and 2 microns in height. Okay, but it will give you sufficient phase lag when light passes through it, and it will cause bending of fringes. Okay, so if you image the cell, so you see the point is that if you did not have this reference beam, in both cases, this is just like a microscope. Okay, that it is a reflection microscope or this is a transmission microscope. But when you add the reference beam to the path, now it is an interferometric microscope. Okay. Is that clear to everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I thought that I will actually show you a specific case so that this. When you just look at these geometries, things are not as clear. So let us take an example. Okay, so here is an example of a hologram. So HXY here is a typical hologram. And what we are going to do to get the fringe modulation, the object beam is, do you see this hologram here? So what do you see in the hologram? Actually, can you tell me?
For some atom like blood cell like structure within.
There is a
fringes.
cell. Okay, so this is under a microscope, interferometric microscope or holographic microscope, and you see that there are these fringes here, but locally the fringes are actually bending, okay, slightly, and there is also an amplitude modulation to these fringes, which means whatever that object is, it's also at some locations it is absorbing light more than and then at other locations. Okay, so so there are two aspects. There is amplitude modulation where the fringes have become dark or slightly darker, and then there is a phase modulation. So if you look at these edges, you will see that it is a slight bending of fringes. Okay, so that is the phase modulation. Now, does the Fourier transform magnitude make sense to you? Look at the second picture.
Yes, sir.
Why is it like that? You have already seen the the thumbprint, fingerprint, where there was an annular ring, but now there is fringes only along one direction nominally. So you have the DC term. The DC term is there because the HXY is all positive function. So if you sum up all the values, then there will be a DC term. But then there are two bands. There is information here and there is information here. Okay. And so what the Fourier transform method does is that you take the hologram, take its two-dimensional FFT, and then you will see that there is information in, we are interested in information in this region. And so what you can do is you can define a zero matrix, all zeros, and you can just take all the values within this circle and put them at the center of that zero matrix. Okay, and then take so you can move the selected region within this circle to DC and make all other pixels in the Fourier domain to 0. Okay, so when you take a Fourier transform, the f of HXY is actually a complex valued function. So what I want to do now is, if I want to extract information in this region, I'm going to take all the pixels in this region and move them to the center. And apart from this region, all pixels I'm going to turn to 0. Okay. And so once I have that, then I'll take an inverse FFT, and then I will get a function, which is again a complex valued function. So the recovered amplitude is shown here and recovered phase map is shown here. Okay. Do you see what I'm doing here, or it's not clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sir, whatever recipe you discussed for the second image, can you repeat it?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is, I'm interested in information only in this band here, right? Of the Fourier space. I know that the information of interest, that is modulation of fringes, is sitting near this peak, the side peak or side lobe peak. Okay, so I'm going to take some region of Fourier space. Okay, and this whole region I'm going to shift to DC, okay, in the center. So all I have to do is take all these pixel values and put them at the center of the image. And outside the circle, I can turn everything else to 0. Okay, so now I have a Fourier transform where only this part, which has some complex values, that is non-zero, and now that is sitting at the DC. Okay, because why is it shifted? It is shifted because there is some spatial frequency of fringes there, isn't it? And so I don't want to have the effect of fringes when I recover the modulation. I think this is very similar to demodulation of AM or FM signals. So you generally try to mix with a local oscillator and then do a low pass filtering, isn't it? When you do a demodulation problem in communication, for example, or radio or something, what you do is you have the signal coming in, you mix it with a local oscillator at the carrier frequency, and then you look at the low pass version of the mixed signal. Okay, so this is exactly what we are doing here, that instead of mixing with a local oscillator, what I'm going to do is just move this region to DC. So I'm negating the effect of carrier frequency, and then rest of the pixels I will turn to 0, and then I will take an inverse transform, and then I will get a complex valued field. Okay, so the recovered amplitude is here and recovered phase is here. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So meaning, if you try to plot a profile of these fringes along a line like this, then you will see a signal like a AM/FM type signal. Okay. And so this is exactly what we are doing. We are demodulating the AM/FM type signal. So AM is the amplitude modulation, phase modulation is the bending of fringes. And so we are doing demodulation of fringes in this way. Okay. But what is the drawback of this? So what is happening is that if my object had a higher spatial frequency that extends beyond this circle, then somehow I'm not going to get information about it. Do you agree with me? Because I have filtered this information now. Because eventually I cannot really increase the size of this filter. At some point, these other terms will start coming in, and that will corrupt my object recovery. And so the Fourier method is inherently a sort of a low pass filtering method, because it only selects a small region around the cross term peak. Okay, so this side lobe peak, it only can select a small region around it, and your resolution is limited by how big a filter you can possibly use without corrupting the image from the signal that is sitting in the center band. Okay, meaning already the size of circle I have used is slightly bigger here. Okay, so it is already getting affected by some information from the center band. Okay. Finally, if you look at the phase image, what does it mean? Okay, so if this, for example, in this case, there was a transmission geometry used. So the phase at every location that you see, there is a phase map. So there is a blue to red values. The values are about a little bit higher than pi here. So it goes from, so this blue is 0, and then there is something close to a little bit higher than pi. Okay. But the value of phi 0 xy, so this is the phase map phi 0 xy. What does it mean? It is actually 2 pi by lambda times the integral of dz. So dz is along the height of this cell. So it is coming out of the plane of this slide. So z direction is normal to the slide itself. And then there is a n relative. Okay, so typically when you make a cell sample, there is some fluid around the cell, and so in calculation of optical path difference, we have to look at the relative refractive index. So the refractive index of the cell material itself minus the refractive index of the surrounding liquid. Okay, so the phase map that you see here, the meaning of that is this. Okay, so it is essentially the optical thickness or optical path difference through the cell at different locations xy. And you're seeing this kind of a phase map. So this cell is kind of a dried cell, and so the nucleus is intact, and the cytoplasm has kind of gone towards its edges. And so in the center you see almost no phase here, but the material has kind of accumulated near the edges of the cytoplasm. Okay. So this equation, everything on this slide is clear to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I wanted to give you a more pictorial understanding of how a hologram looks and what you are actually getting out of it when you demodulate the fringes. Okay. And then we have to, okay, so we have to understand two things. What does the phase mean and what does the amplitude image mean? What do you think?
Sir, doesn't that speak about the intensity at every point, like of the image?
Yeah, so it speaks about the transmitted intensity at every point. Okay. So the cell is looks like in the nucleus, the cell is absorbing light a little bit. In this part, it is right now the way that cell is, it is kind of more transparent in this area, and at the edges, as I said, there is more material accumulated right now. So that part is also seems to be absorbing light a little bit. Okay. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
But you see that the cell is not opaque because the fringes are, the fringes are, if there was a region where the cell is opaque, the fringes won't exist there. Okay, so if no light is coming out of some part of the cell, then there won't be fringes at that location. Okay, so the cell is still kind of transparent. It is really thin, and so there is an amplitude part to the wavefront that is coming out of the cell, which is here, and there is a phase part to it. Okay. All right. Let's look at another possible method where you are
Sir,
yes.
sir, in previous, yes, sir, how do we get this n relative?
N relative you cannot get unless you know what the material is. Okay. So it's you don't have when you have the phase function alone, it is actually a product of the thickness of the cell and the refractive index in some sense. It is the optical part difference information. The thickness of the cell and the n, they are not available from phase function separately. Okay, for that you have to do two experiments. One is you can change the surrounding liquid. Okay, so you can have two different surrounding liquids with known refractive index. So you can have, for example, pure water and maybe salt water for which the index is known. And so based on that, you can find the unknown refractive index of the cells. However, in a lot of literature that you will see, people only look at the phase function itself. So they don't generally always have a way to separate out these two components. Okay. But I also want to kind of give another thought for you, that if you did imaging of this cell under a typical normal microscope, then you will only recover this amplitude image. Okay. The information in phase has something to do with the optical thickness of the cell at different locations. And so this information that is in phase, that is somewhat newer kind of information that is not present in the typical microscope. Okay, so this information is, so if you think about it, if you think about the refractive index as having a real part and imaginary part, then the imaginary part of the index tells you something about the absorption of light in the material. And the phase that we are plotting is telling you something about the real part of the refractive index. Okay, so these two informations, they are complementary to each other. So they are, so one cannot be derived from the other. All right. If we are doing experiment only at one laser frequency, then these two informations are different. They are complementary, meaning they are not related to each other. They are independent of each other, and they relate to the real and imaginary part of the refractive index of the material for the laser wavelength that you are using. Okay. Let us look at another case or another kind of hologram where maybe.
Does the imaginary
Yes.
part of waves have any physical meaning?
Well, you know that the permittivity epsilon has a real part and imaginary part, right?
I do not know about it.
You don't know that? Have you seen the model for refractive index? How refractive index is explained?
Okay, maybe I forgot.
So, yeah, so the way it is handled is you kind of think of an atom and an electron in it, and if the E field of light is falling on it, then this oscillating E field will drive the electron. And so the model of how the material responds to an incident light wave is like a damped oscillator, so a forced damped oscillator. So it will have the motion can be explained in terms of the acceleration. Then it has a restoring force, which is the natural frequency for the atom. There is a damping force, and also the driving field is the electric field. So I think you can look up Griffith's book or something where the refractive index is explained. And you must have seen, the relation of refractive index with wavelength. So refractive index as a function of lambda has a form of, say, a plus b by lambda squared and things like that. Have you seen any relation like that?
Yes, sir, that one I know.
So how did you get to that? Meaning you have to look up that part. So I would recommend that you can look up Griffiths, for example, just refresh yourself. You can also look up Feynman lectures if you want. It is explained very nicely there. Okay.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah. And so based on that, you will see that epsilon or permittivity actually has both a real part as well as an imaginary part. And so permittivity is then related to the refractive index. And so the imaginary part of index is essentially representing absorption of light or electromagnetic waves at a particular wavelength. Okay. Okay. Another way to look at this problem is, see, what we are interested in is we have this hxy, and we are looking at recovering this oxy out of it. Okay, so another way to recover oxy, when there can be cases where the Fourier structure is not so nice, and for example, my reference beam could be a spherical wave, and in that case, I don't have really access to different bands. Meaning, if I here, the band structure of the hologram was this way because my fringes were straight line fringes. But you could have a case like Newton's ring, where the fringes are actually circular, and if you have circular fringes, then the Fourier structure of the hologram does not have this nice. You can just separate out one term and things like that. And so how would you otherwise find the field? And so what is done is you can use 4 different holograms, and what is done is so the reference beam gets 4 additional phases. Okay, so the first reference beam is the same as the reference beam I showed before. The second one could be r e raised to I pi by 2. The third one could have a pi phase shift, and fourth one could have a 3 pi by 2 phase shift. And physically, what you can do is in the reference beam, you can add wave plates, for example, or you can have something like a small piezo translator on this mirror, for example, and you can push the mirror or translate the mirror by hundreds of nanometers, and then that will create a phase shift in the reference beam. The relative phase shift will be there, and that way you can actually think of other forms of interferometers. Okay, so I think right now I will stop here because the time is up, and we will discuss this point tomorrow. Okay. if there is any quick question, I can still take it. But otherwise, we will have this discussion tomorrow. And what I'm planning is tomorrow is the lecture till which I will teach. On Friday, what I will do is I will keep the class open, where I would encourage you to go through all the notes and come up with questions. So for an hour, we can all discuss. I will allow you to share your screen, or if you want to send me questions beforehand, you can send them in email, and I can discuss all the questions, meaning all the questions you have. Okay. So the last class before the exam, I don't want to teach. I will keep it open for just for discussion. So even if you just want me to repeat something, I will do that. And that is how I plan to do the things. Okay, but tomorrow, this topic, phase shifting method, that topic definitely we can cover tomorrow and have a little more discussion of some advanced methods after that. Okay.
Sir, can we expect some concession over the syllabus?
I think till tomorrow should be fine. I have really, if you look at it in the coherent imaging, I have not really covered too many concepts. Only one or two concepts are there. So I think because there is only one minor, otherwise things will become too much at the majors time. So I will cover till tomorrow. I will cover one more additional topic, but after that I will leave the discussion, only open for discussion.
So one more thing.
Yeah.
Sir, tomorrow we are having the lab lecture at 2:30.
Okay.
Actually, we haven't started. At least I haven't started with doing the recent laboratory work that you have given. So
which lab lecture? 2:30.
On Thursday, sir.
Yes. So.
So can we have discussion over the theory in that lecture?
No, but there are students here who are not taking the lab class. You can ask a few questions during that time. I'm not averse to that, but I think people may have. There are many people in this class who are not taking the computational imaging lab, which is more focused towards the MTech program. And so I think out of 50 or 55 students who are registered, only about 15 are taking the lab. So you can definitely ask me questions that time, but I would still like to have the Friday class so that the floor is open for anybody to ask questions. Actually.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay, then we will meet tomorrow and continue the discussion. Sir? Yeah.
What would be the nature of the exam? Like, is it like we would have to write some exam or code or something?
Well, don't worry. It will not be too much writing. It will be no question will take more than few lines. So it's not objective completely, but some thinking will be involved. Okay. So I want to keep it open book also. So all the lectures you can refer to during the exam, but maybe I will give some meaning there will be questions that are interpretation based, or I will show you some images, ask you for your interpretation. I will not ask you to write codes for the exam, but that I will make sure that I will not ask you to write codes within 1 hour or 1.5 hours, things like that. Okay.
Okay.
So it's only we will test your ability to interpret things around whatever I have taught. All right. And you don't have to remember anything. So just keep your thinking, abilities fresh. So don't have to load yourself with any, your memory can be kept free. Okay.
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 All right.
Sir, I
Thank
have
you.
one doubt, sir. So,
Yes.
I was doing the last assignment. This is when I thought of the doubt. So, sir, what is mathematically or computationally the difference between the divergence function and the gradient function, because both are just differentiating the function. I mean, as for a matrix,
Well,
do
it
the,
is divergence. You know that divergence is so if you do it is meaning it is what it is. So gradient takes a scalar and produces a vector, whereas the divergence takes a vector and produces a scalar, isn't it? Only one.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So for taking gradient, you have just one component image, for example. So if when you take a gradient, then you have a x derivative image and a y derivative image. Okay. Whereas when you do divergence, you take x derivative of the x component and y derivative of the y component and add up together, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So these operations, they both involve differentiation only, but they are doing something completely different, isn't it?
Yes, sir. So is there so it is mathematically possible to represent divergence in terms of gradients in MATLAB?
No, it's not in terms of gradients. It's in terms of partial derivatives, actually.
Yes, sir. Partial derivatives.
Yes. That is anyways the definition of divergence, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
It's not
Sir,
specific.
follow-up?
Yeah.
Sorry, sir. Sorry to interrupt you. Yes, Michelle asked.
Sir,
Yes.
my doubt is clear, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Sir, follow up to his question. We could repurpose the gradient function to a gradient function in MATLAB to get to compute divergence, right? Like sometimes it is required to take divergence.
Yes. You can do that. No problem.
Taking one part of the
Meaning internally,
inputs.
both the functions are doing only the differentiation along x-axis and y-axis, isn't it?
So is there a divergence function in MATLAB?
Yes, there is a divergence function.
Oh, okay.
But it does exactly what divergence is supposed to do.
Okay.
So the divergence function will take two images. So first image will be the x component, second image will be the y component, and then it will take the x derivative of the x component and y derivative of the y component and add up and produce one image. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. We'll stop here.